stars shimmered quietly, each one an eternal flame in the boundless blackness of space. The universe was vast, immeasurable in its endless expanse, yet tonight it seemed smaller, suffocating even. In the distant sectors of the galaxy, a battle was unfolding, one that would echo through the corridors of history for eons to come. Humanity, once a rising power among the stars, now found itself struggling against an enemy unlike any they had ever faced. The first wave of the battle had been lost, the second even worse. And now, as the enemy's forces closed in, it was clear to everyone on board the Razor's Edge. This might be the final stand. Admiral Soren Valen stood at the helm of humanity's flagship, his gaze fixed on the holographic display before him. The Razor's Edge was a marvel of human engineering, sleek, deadly, and almost unstoppable. But today, it felt like a relic trapped in a galaxy that had grown far too dangerous. The once proud fleet that had represented the zenith of humanity's strength was now crumbling. They were outmatched in every way. The enemy forces, a coalition of alien races that had once been scattered, now unified under a banner of conquest, had adapted too quickly, learned too well from every engagement. Their ships, agile and deadly, tore through human defenses like a blade cutting through paper. Their technology was far beyond anything humanity had imagined, and their strategies, brutal and efficient, were devastatingly effective. Soren's hands gripped the armrests of his command chair, the polished metal cold under his fingers. His eyes moved rapidly across the readouts, watching as the enemy fleet tightened its noose. They were everywhere, a vast armada, poised to strike. Hundreds, no, thousands of ships, each one designed for destruction, bearing down on his position. Some were sleek, others monstrous in size, but all of them were fast, efficient, and lethal. Humanity's once pristine lines of defense, which had seemed impenetrable at the height of their power, were now a shadow of their former glory. Ships that had once been symbols of human resilience lay scattered across space, their wreckage floating like forgotten tombstones. "Admiral, we've lost contact with the rear guard. They're gone," a voice called from behind him. It was Commander Ilara Voss, his right hand, her face grim as she read the status reports. "We can't hold out much longer. The enemy has breached our outer perimeter." Soren turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. "How long do we have?" 5 minutes, maybe less. 5 minutes. The cold reality of those words sank into him like an anchor, dragging him deeper into the void. 5 minutes. That was all they had left before the enemy tore through the last of their defenses and swept into the heart of the fleet. The Razor's Edge had been humanity's last line of defense, its shield and sword, and now it was little more than a sitting target. The enemy's fire was relentless, a steady barrage that shook the ship to its core. The shields were holding, barely. Each hit from the alien forces sent violent tremors through the hull, and the lights flickered with every blast. The ship groaned, straining under the pressure. Systems were beginning to fail, one by one. "Report, Lieutenant." Soren's voice was calm, though every inch of him felt like it was on fire. This was not how it was supposed to end. Humanity was supposed to be the ones conquering the stars, not fleeing from them. "Admiral," Lieutenant Avara spoke, her voice sharp. "Our forward cannons are nearly offline. Shields are at 30%. The enemy is closing in on the core of the fleet. We have no way to escape." Escape. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. It wasn't just the Razor's Edge they had to worry about. The enemy was methodical. They were everywhere, and their ships were capable of cutting off any avenue of retreat. There was no hope of running. There was no hope of winning. Soren's eyes locked onto the viewports, the infinite stretch of space outside staring back at him like a vast, uncaring ocean. How had it come to this? Humanity had fought so hard to reach this point. Colonies had been built. Wars had been fought. And lives had been sacrificed in the name of progress. And now it seemed like it was all for nothing. "Admiral, we're receiving an anomalous transmission," Lieutenant Avara interrupted his thoughts. She quickly turned her gaze to the communications console. "It's faint, but it's definitely there." "A distress signal?" Soren asked, his heart sinking. "No, sir," Avara responded, her voice trembling with uncertainty. "It's not a distress signal. The signature is unfamiliar. It's not from any known fleet. Soren felt a spark of hope flicker deep within him. It was a long shot, a faint thread of possibility in an ocean of despair. But they needed something, anything, that could turn the tide of this battle. "Open the channel," he ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. For a brief moment there was nothing but static, the kind of noise that spoke of broken communication lines, lost transmissions, and desperation. Then, the silence broke. A voice, low and calm, crackled through the speakers, an artificial voice perhaps, or a highly trained human with a machine's precision. But it was a voice filled with purpose. "You are not alone." Soren's breath caught in his throat. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that crushed all doubt in his mind. They were not alone. Before he could react, the ship's tactical display flickered. A small anomaly appeared in the corner of the screen. An object, distant, yet undeniably large. Soren squinted, his pulse quickening. The object was massive, too large to be anything but a ship, but it was unlike any human design. Its structure was sleek, dark, and almost organic in nature, like something born of the stars themselves. It stretched across the display, and as it did, more followed. Dozens of ships, each one larger and more advanced than anything humanity had ever seen, emerged from the dark expanse of space, their surfaces gleaming with a strange, otherworldly energy. Humanity's deadliest fleet had arrived. Soren's mind raced as the ship's signatures began to register on the sensors. The fleet was unmistakably human, but far more advanced than anything he could have imagined. He had heard rumors, whispers of ships built in the deep recesses of space, technologies so advanced they could warp the very fabric of reality. But these ships, these were no myths, they were real, and they had come just in time. "Admiral," Alara's voice cut through his thoughts. "I don't understand. Where did they come from?" "I don't know," Soren replied, his voice barely above a whisper. He could feel the weight of this moment pressing down on him. "But I think we've just found our salvation." The massive fleet moved into position, their ships gliding smoothly through the void, each one seemingly more powerful than the last. The enemy forces, once so confident in their inevitable victory, faltered for the first time. There was no retreat, no possibility of escape. The battle was about to shift. The war was about to be rewritten, and humanity's deadliest fleet was leading the charge. The enemy fleet faltered, but only for a moment. It was as though a giant had awoken in the dark, casting a long shadow over everything they had hoped to achieve. The appearance of the mysterious ships, massive and graceful, moved in eerie unison, a symphony of war vessels with designs that defied human understanding. Each ship glided through the stars with a purpose, as if they had always been there, waiting for this moment. They were a stark contrast to the enemy's forces, aggressive, alien, and relentless. The sheer size of their ships alone was enough to send a chill down Soren's spine. The first of the human fleet's vessels, its flagship, the Leviathan, was a colossal ship that dwarfed even the largest of the enemy warships. It was a silent giant, its hull composed of a material that shimmered like liquid silver under the light of distant stars. Its contours were sleek, almost organic in form, giving the impression of a creature that had evolved in the depths of space. The ship's surface rippled with energy, emitting a soft blue glow, as though it were alive. The power that radiated from it was unmistakable. It was the culmination of centuries of human innovation, experimentation, and sacrifice, and it was here now, at the edge of humanity's last hope, ready to rewrite the outcome of the battle. Soren felt his heart race as he watched the Leviathan deploy its drones. Thousands of sleek black ships erupted from its belly, each one resembling a miniature version of their parent vessel. They were swift and agile, designed for one thing and one thing only: total annihilation. The drones were a new breed of war machines, far beyond anything humanity had ever imagined. Their weapons were precise, capable of targeting and obliterating enemy vessels with surgical accuracy. And their shields, they shimmered with an ethereal glow, bending the very fabric of space around them, making them nearly impossible to target. The enemy fleet hesitated, This was not what they had anticipated. The intelligence they had gathered on humanity's forces had been incorrect, incomplete. They had expected a final, desperate stand from a broken people, not the arrival of a fleet that was not only technologically superior, but seemed to bend the rules of physics itself. The enemy commanders scrambled to recalibrate their strategies, but it was too late. The Leviathan and its drones moved with terrifying precision, cutting through the enemy lines like a blade through flesh. A volley of energy blasts erupted from one of the alien warships, streaking through space with deadly intent. But before the beams could reach their target, a series of defensive shields flared into existence around the Leviathan. The alien fire was absorbed into the shimmering energy field, harmlessly dissipating as the human ships advanced. It was a testament to the technological mastery that had been hidden from the galaxy for so long, a weapon built to outlast and overpower any adversary. "Captain, the enemy is reconfiguring their formations," Avara reported, her voice tense, but calm. "They're attempting to concentrate their firepower on the Leviathan. It's only a matter of time before they bring down the shields." Soren nodded grimly. He had anticipated this. His fleet might be powerful, but the enemy was no stranger to strategy. They would throw everything they had at humanity's strongest ship, hoping to cripple it and remove the threat. It was the logical course of action. "We'll give them a reason to rethink that strategy," Soren muttered under his breath, more to himself than anyone else. He gripped the command chair tighter, feeling the weight of the moment bearing down on him. His fleet, though vastly outnumbered, was about to show the enemy just how wrong they were in underestimating humanity. The Leviathan had been designed, not just as a ship, but as a symbol of everything humanity had accomplished. It was the culmination of decades of research into advanced energy shielding, quantum weaponry, and artificial intelligence. The fleet had developed weaponry capable of breaking through any known defense, and now it would be put to the ultimate test. Soren's orders were simple: annihilate the enemy's fleet. It wasn't a matter of strategy, it was survival. They had no choice but to win. The battle unfolded with brutal precision. The Leviathan fired first, its main cannon lighting up the vacuum of space with a blinding burst of energy. The blast cut through the heart of the nearest enemy vessel, its hull disintegrating in an instant, scattering debris in every direction. The drones followed suit, launching precise salvos that hit their targets with unerring accuracy. Alien ships, once filled with confident commanders and soldiers, were reduced to fragments, their once mighty forms crumbling under the overwhelming force of humanity's technological might. But the enemy didn't give up so easily. The remaining alien warships regrouped, adjusting their tactics. They flanked the human fleet, surrounding them with speed and agility. They had superior numbers, and their ships were designed for rapid movement and sudden strikes. The human fleet, powerful though it was now engaged in a deadly game of cat and mouse. The Leviathan was powerful, but it was also a massive target. Every shot from the enemy threatened to break through its shields. Soren watched as one of the alien ships, a sleek vessel with elongated wings that shimmered like a mirage, fired a series of plasma torpedoes. They rocketed through space, trailing a deadly wake as they homed in on the Leviathan. The drones attempted to intercept, but they were too slow, too far out of position. The torpedoes were closing in fast. "Brace for impact," Soren barked. His crew scrambled to their positions, though they all knew the ship's shields were already operating at full capacity. The incoming fire would test their limits. The explosion was deafening. A burst of energy rocked the Leviathan, sending shockwaves through the hull. The impact rattled the ship, throwing the crew to the floor, but the shields held firm. For a moment, the bridge fell into silence. The lights flickered briefly, and the crew exchanged worried glances. Then, slowly, the hum of the Leviathan's systems returned, and the ship's shields regenerated, more resilient than ever. It was a testament to the ship's design, a piece of technology far ahead of its time. But the battle was far from over. The enemy fleet adapted quickly, realizing that brute force alone would not win the day. They deployed smaller, faster ships, using their agility to weave in and out of the human defenses, striking with precision and disappearing before the Leviathan could retaliate. It was clear now. This was no longer just a test of technology. It was a test of endurance, of will. Humanity had been backed into a corner. But now, with the Leviathan and its fleet leading the charge, they were making a stand. The enemy was powerful, but they had underestimated humanity's resilience. The true nature of this battle was only just beginning to reveal itself. "Admiral," Alara said, her voice tense, "the enemy is regrouping for a final push. They're going to throw everything they have at us. We need to act quickly." Soren nodded. His gaze never left the tactical display. They had no time to waste. They had to strike now, before the enemy could reassemble their forces. "Prepare the secondary weapons," Soren ordered. "It's time to show them what humanity can really do." The fleet was ready. The final push was coming, and humanity's deadliest fleet was about to remind the galaxy that no one, not even the most powerful of enemies, could ever take them for granted again. The Leviathan surged forward, its hull groaning as its engines pushed the ship to its limits. The crew could feel the tension in the air, a low hum of uncertainty that vibrated through the very bones of the ship. The enemy's forces were closing in, their massive warships encircling the human fleet like a pack of predators closing in on their prey. The stakes had never been higher. Humanity's survival depended on the outcome of this final, desperate charge. Soren's hands gripped the command chair, his fingers white-knuckled from the pressure. The battle had already cost them dearly. Several human ships had been destroyed, or severely damaged, their crews lost in the cold vacuum of space. The Leviathan itself had been struck multiple times, but its reinforced shields had absorbed the brunt of the blows, and its advanced systems had repaired the damage quickly. But the enemy's tenacity was unlike anything they had faced before. They had expected humanity to break after the initial strikes, but instead, they had encountered a fierce resolve that defied all logic. Alara, standing at her station, monitored the enemy's movements closely. "Admiral, they're regrouping for a full-on assault. Their larger ships are forming a perimeter, and the smaller vessels are closing in for strafing runs. They're going to try to overwhelm us with speed." Soren nodded, his mind working furiously. The enemy's strategy was clear now. They intended to wear down the human fleet through sheer numbers and precision. The smaller ships would dart in, deliver devastating strikes, and then retreat before the Leviathan could lock onto them. It was a tactic designed to frustrate and exhaust. And it was working. The human fleet was beginning to show signs of wear. Shields were fluctuating, engines sputtering, and ammunition was running low. They needed a decisive blow, something to turn the tide in their favor before the enemy wore them down completely. "Deploy the long-range artillery," Soren ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "I want the enemy's command. Ships disabled now." A moment of silence followed as his orders were transmitted. The crew braced themselves. The Leviathan was equipped with some of the most advanced weaponry in the galaxy, but it hadn't yet revealed its full potential. Now, the time had come to unleash the ship's most powerful weapons, the long-range ion disruptors. These weapons were capable of disabling enemy ships from light years away, sending electrical surges through their systems and frying their electronics. They were the ultimate equalizer in a battle against more agile and numerous foes. The Leviathan's massive barrels swung into position with terrifying precision, targeting the largest of the enemy warships. With a deep, resonating hum, the cannons fired. A brilliant blue pulse shot forth, traveling at the speed of light, covering the vast distance between the human and alien fleets in mere seconds. The energy burst struck the first command ship, squarely in the center, and for a brief moment, everything went still. Then, an explosion rippled outward from the alien vessel, its once pristine hull crackling with energy as the ion disruptor's charge disabled its engines and weapon systems. The ship shuddered violently as its systems faltered. The surrounding ships, previously coordinated in their assault, suddenly found themselves without leadership, their communications scrambling in the wake of the disruption. "Direct hit," Alara said, her voice filled with awe. "One down. Now we just have to keep them from regrouping." Soren watched as the chaos spread through the enemy fleet. The loss of one of their primary command vessels had caused a ripple effect, unsettling their formation. Ships began to panic, breaking off their attacks and moving in erratic patterns. But the moment of triumph was short-lived. The enemy was learning, adapting quickly to the human counterattack. "They've found our weakness," Alara continued, her eyes glued to the tactical screen. "Their smaller ships are now targeting our drones. They're trying to reduce our firepower by taking out our support vessels." Soren's heart sank. The drones had been their ace in the hole, fast, nimble, and capable of overwhelming the enemy's defenses. Losing them would be a significant blow. But there was no time for hesitation. The human fleet had to adapt, just as the enemy had. "Reassign the drones to the flanks," Soren ordered. "We need to keep them off our backs. Alara, activate the cloaking protocol on the secondary fleet. Let's see if we can outmaneuver them." The cloaking technology was one of humanity's greatest secrets. It allowed ships to vanish from detection by even the most advanced sensor systems for brief periods. The Leviathan had a version of this technology, though it was still in the experimental stages. The secondary fleet, composed of smaller but equally lethal warships, would now vanish from the enemy's sight, giving them a critical advantage. The ships moved with terrifying precision, slipping through the enemy's defenses undetected and attacking from unexpected angles. It was a game of cat and mouse. But for the first time since the battle began, humanity was in control. The alien ships, still reeling from the loss of their command vessel, were now being picked off one by one. The smaller human warships darted in and out of the enemy formations, using their speed and agility to strike before retreating into the cloak of invisibility once again. But it wasn't enough. The enemy was still too strong, their numbers too great. Soren knew that they couldn't keep up this fight for much longer. They had to break the enemy's will to fight, and to do that they needed a decisive strike, a blow that would send a message, not just to the enemy fleet, but to every civilization in the galaxy that humanity was no longer a fragile, helpless species. He turned to Alara, his face set with grim determination. "Activate the final protocol," he said. "Let's end this." The final protocol had been kept under wraps for months, its existence known only to a select few within humanity's military command. It was a weapon so powerful that its deployment could potentially alter the course of the war, and possibly the balance of power in the galaxy itself. Soren had never intended to use it, but now, in the face of such overwhelming odds, there was no other choice. Alara nodded, her fingers flying over the control panel. "Final protocol online. The weapon is primed." "Do it," Soren ordered, his voice unshakable. The Leviathan's engines flared to life as the weapon powered up. A low hum filled the ship, vibrating through the hull as a massive energy pulse built within the core of the ship. It was a weapon designed to disrupt not just ships, but entire planetary systems. If they unleashed it now, it would cripple the enemy fleet in one fell swoop, leaving their forces in disarray. But the cost would be high. The weapon was dangerous, unpredictable, and it would leave a permanent mark on the battlefield. Soren didn't hesitate. It was time to end the fight, once and for all. The Leviathan's core surged with energy, its reactors glowing a deep, ominous crimson as the final protocol reached critical levels. A warning klaxon sounded through the corridors, an eerie, oscillating tone that every crew member recognized instantly. This was not a drill. The final protocol had been armed, and within moments, the most powerful weapon humanity had ever conceived would be unleashed upon the battlefield. Soren stood in silence, his eyes fixed on the main display. The enemy fleet, though momentarily disoriented, had begun to regroup. Their vessels moved with mechanical precision, reorganizing into attack formations that stretched across the void like a metal web. They were preparing for another strike, one they clearly believed would finish what they'd started. But they were unaware of what was coming. They didn't know that the very fabric of space around them was about to be torn apart. The weapon, codenamed Heimdall's Eye, was more than just a weapon of mass destruction. It was the culmination of centuries of suppressed Earth sciences and forbidden research, an antimatter pulse cannon designed not to destroy individual ships, but to rip through the quantum field that stabilized local spacetime. It was theorized to collapse propulsion matrices, disrupt FTL drives, and paralyze even the most advanced neural link navigation systems. When Heimdall's Eye was fired, it didn't simply hit targets, it erased them from combat relevance. Below decks, engineers barked out final calibrations as containment fields strained to hold the antimatter charge in place. Deep within the ship's armored belly, glowing spheres of oppositional mass rotated in perfect balance, barely separated by fractions of atomic width. Should the fields falter, Leviathan itself would be obliterated in a burst of light that would shine brighter than a star. The tension was soul-deep. Every technician, every officer, every crew member aware that this moment balanced on a razor's edge. Ilara's voice broke the silence on the bridge. Final protocol fully charged. Targeting array is locked. We're ready, Admiral. Soren took a long breath. He thought of Earth. Not the Earth of old, broken by internal strife, but the new one that had risen from the ashes, united under the desperate banner of survival. He thought of the colonies, scattered across the stars, vulnerable and watching, and he thought of what message they would send today, not just to this enemy, but to the entire galaxy. Fire, he said. The Leviathan shuddered as Heimdall's eye fired. There was no visible beam, no missile launched. Instead, the space in front of the human fleet shimmered, like a heat haze stretching across a desert, and then imploded silently. The stars twisted inward, as though a great invisible hand had grasped a portion of reality and squeezed. The enemy didn't even have time to react. The core of their fleet, 3 command ships, a dozen cruisers, and scores of fighter escorts, simply ceased. No explosion, no debris, just a collapsing wave of silence, followed by a radiant pulse of distorted light as their drives and neural systems were unmade. Ship by ship, their vessels powered down or vanished from sensors entirely. The alien network, which had relied on tightly woven communications between artificial minds, fell into chaos. Across the battlefield, enemy vessels veered off course, blind and deaf. Some spiraled into one another. Others floated lifeless, their crews scrambling in panic as systems crashed and interfaces blinked into darkness. A few tried to flee, but with no coherent chain of command and no functioning FTL drives, their retreat became a chaotic rout. On the Leviathan, silence followed. No cheers, no celebration. Just stunned, heavy quiet. They had won, but at what cost? The sensors displayed a graveyard of darkened ships drifting aimlessly, their forms lit only by the distant, flickering starlight. Heimdall's eye had done its job, and more. In a single act, humanity had demonstrated not only its power, but its willingness to wield that power when cornered. The enemy had underestimated them, believing humans to be fractured, emotional, reactive. What they had failed to see was that desperation had forged something far more dangerous. Unity born of necessity, and resolve shaped by extinction. Ilara finally broke the silence. Status reports coming in. Minimal damage to Leviathan. Our support fleet is intact, and the enemy is... It's over, Admiral. They're done. Soren didn't respond right away. His eyes were still fixed on the battlefield. He wasn't seeing the ruined enemy fleet. He was seeing the implications. Somewhere, far from this corner of the galaxy, observers were watching. Other civilizations, empires that had written humanity off, political alliances that had seen Earth as a backwater. Now they would know. Humanity had teeth, and it had the will to bear them. He turned to Ilara. "Prepare a transmission," he said, "to every known system in the sector. Let them all see what happened here." Ilara nodded, understanding the gravity of the moment. "What do you want?" The message to say? Soren's voice was quiet, but each word carried the weight of a future rewritten. "We are not the prey." And with that, the Leviathan turned slowly in the star-drenched void, its engines firing as it moved through the wreckage of the enemy fleet. Behind them, the final echoes of the battle faded into silence, while ahead lay an uncertain future. One where Earth would no longer be a footnote in galactic affairs. The humans had not just survived. They had stood against extinction and roared back with the fury of a species reborn, and the galaxy would never forget. The transmission pulsed outward like a ripple across a dark ocean, carried on encrypted quantum bands and ancient signal arrays, reawakened for this very purpose. Dozens of relay satellites scattered across the local star systems blinked to life, obediently passing the message further and further, until the statement, 6 simple words, reached corners of the galaxy that hadn't spoken the name Earth in centuries. We are not the prey. A declaration, a warning, a line drawn in the stellar dust. On distant worlds, the impact was immediate. In the ivory chambers of the Thalshek Imperium, an empire that once toyed with humanity's extinction for sport, Council, members known for their cold logic, debated in urgent tones. Their holographic displays replayed the Leviathan's firing sequence over and over, analyzing the energy spikes, attempting to decrypt the mechanics of Heimdall's eye. They failed. The weapon defied known equations. It wasn't just powerful. It was incomprehensible, built by a species they had once dismissed as primitive, loud, and tragically short-lived. In the helix spires of Zarnith, a species whose ships shimmered like oil across the cosmos, prophets broke their long silence. For generations, they had whispered of a silent sun that would scream once more. Now they claimed that scream had come from humanity. Alien eyes turned toward Earth, not with pity or curiosity, but with reverence, fear, and the cold calculation of survival. But not all reactions were diplomatic. Deep within the red fog of the Tyvolk expanse, where clans bred their offspring in bioforges and worshipped entropy as faith, the footage ignited a bloodlust. The destruction wrought by the Leviathan was not a deterrent, it was a challenge. The Tyvolk did not fear death, they hunted it, and now they saw Earth as the apex prey. Within days, war drums carved from the bones of fallen planets began to sound. Back aboard the Leviathan, the crew moved with a new sense of purpose. The battle was over, but the war, the real one, had just begun. They knew their actions had awakened powers both ancient and emergent. The quiet corners of the galaxy were stirring, recalibrating their political strategies, rewriting threat assessments, and dispatching emissaries cloaked in silver-tongued deceit. But Soren had expected this. Humanity had not revealed its hand, out of pride, but necessity. Earth's leaders had calculated every possibility, knew the galaxy would split into factions, those who would fear, those who would retaliate, and those who would come offering peace while planting seeds of manipulation. Yet beneath the surface of that calculation was something far older than strategy, a human truth, something no artificial intelligence or alien council could simulate or dissect. Resilience born from struggle, evolution carved from catastrophe. Earth had been fractured by war, drowned in its own oceans, poisoned by ambition, and frozen in ideological winters. But it had always survived. And now, with the stars as its frontier, humanity was not just surviving, it was learning, adapting, and, most dangerously, remembering. Remembering every insult, every blockade, every treaty that demanded subservience, every world that had looked down on Earth from orbit and decided it wasn't worth saving. The Leviathan docked at Citadel 3, an orbital command station built within the hollowed remains of an ancient moon. Its interior buzzed with fresh activity, scientists scrambling to decode new data streams, diplomats rushing to coordinate with colony representatives, and AI administrators adjusting defensive matrices across hundreds of systems. The corridors were tight metallic veins through which the lifeblood of a rising species now flowed. Alara walked them with the weight of history pressing on her shoulders. She was no longer just a fleet commander. She was a symbol, the woman who had activated the final protocol, the woman who had pulled the trigger that echoed across the galaxy. She couldn't walk 10 paces without someone saluting, bowing, or simply staring in reverent silence. It felt unnatural, wrong. She hadn't fired out of glory or vengeance. She'd fired because they were out of options. She found Soren in a quiet chamber overlooking the stars, a datapad in his hand, unread. He didn't look up as she entered, but his voice cut through the silence like a blade. "We've become the story now." She stepped beside him, staring at the scattered debris still drifting beyond the station's gravitational edge. "They needed to know we wouldn't run." Soren nodded. "And now they do. But what story will they tell? That we struck back? That we're dangerous? Or that we're desperate?" There was no easy answer. In the vastness of space, truth was malleable, shaped by perspective, rewritten by power. But one truth remained, undeniable, and etched into the stars. Humanity had crossed a threshold. The age of silent endurance was over. Earth had stepped onto the galactic stage not as a vassal, not as a curiosity, but as a force to be reckoned with. And while the path forward would be perilous, one thing was now certain. The galaxy could no longer ignore them.